There she stood, arms crossed, sunglasses perched like a queen inspecting her peasants, pointing at my late brother's Navy SEAL memorial. She called it an unsightly decoration. What she didn't know was that her HOA power trip was about to be reviewed by a very different chain of command, one that answers with more than just paperwork. It was one of those slow-burning moments where you don't even react at first. You're not stunned. You're not angry. You're just waiting for the punchline. Because surely, she didn't just call a folded flag, a small bronze plaque, and a pair of worn combat boots beneath a photo of my brother unsightly. Surely she wasn't wagging her little HOA president finger at a memorial for someone who bled out in a desert to make sure she could safely sip her morning mocha without hearing mortar fire in the distance. But no. She was dead serious. Charlene Green, self-appointed queen of Maplestone Estates, had apparently reached the end of her mental bandwidth for anything aesthetic that didn't match the beige-painted prison of her personal taste. I've seen things. I've served in places where the air tastes like dust and adrenaline, where you keep your back to the wall and your eyes on every rooftop. But somehow, nothing prepares you for the suburban warfare that is an HOA Karen. I wasn't just facing a lady with a clipboard. I was facing a tyrant in kitten heels with a $9,000 landscaping budget and the personality of a wet sponge soaked in vinegar. Charlene didn't knock. She never did. She strutted up like she owned the pavement, waving a manila folder in one hand and pointing at the memorial with the other like it had personally offended her hydrangeas. "This is not in compliance with the Visual Uniformity Clause," she said, lips pursed so tight they could have vacuum-sealed beef jerky. She pointed at the flag. "That's oversized. And the plaque? No prior approval. You'll need to remove it. I'm giving you 24 hours. I stood there, hands in my pockets, trying to figure out if this was some kind of twisted HOA improv. Maybe she lost a bet. Maybe Ashton Kutcher was going to jump out from the bushes. But no. This woman was prepared to fine me $100 a day for honoring my brother. My brother, Matt. The kid who dragged 3 injured teammates out of a burning Humvee before a sniper round made him the reason I even put up the memorial in the first place. I tried reason. Always start with reason. I explained what it was, who it was for. I even offered to move the boots closer to the porch and swap out the flag for a smaller one. Hell, I told her I'd plant begonias around it if she was that desperate for a color scheme. Her response? Rules are rules. Your tragedy doesn't exempt you. That's when something cracked in me, not loudly, but surgically, like a quiet switch flipping. That quiet part of the brain that stops caring about approval and starts calculating justice. Now, I'm not an angry guy. I don't break stuff. I don't yell. What I do is plan. What I do is file paperwork, make calls, gather evidence. You'd be amazed at how efficient veterans can be when you tell them something sacred has been disrespected by a glorified meter made with delusions of authority. I didn't say much after that. Just nodded, thanked her for the notice and walked back inside. But inside, my mind was sprinting. Later that night, I found a violation sticker, bright orange and smug, slapped right onto the plaque. She had physically walked onto my lawn and vandalized the one piece of peace I had left of my brother. That was it. That was the moment I knew I was going to destroy her, but not in the way she expected. No screaming. No door slamming. I was going to pull the rug from under her orthotic inserts in full compliance with both HOA bylaws and federal law. The next morning, I started digging. Not dirt. Record. Policies. There's this thing called the Gold Star Families Memorial Act. And while Charlene was busy measuring flagpoles and playing neighborhood dictator, I was on the phone with a real attorney, one who specialized in veteran affairs. I also called someone else, someone Matt had served with. Let's just say the conversation ended with the words, "We've got your back." Say when. Charlene, of course, continued on her tyrannical parade. She sent me another letter, this time with official HOA stationery, informing me that if I didn't comply, They would begin fining me and possibly taking legal action. She even CC'd the entire board, which, by the way, consisted mostly of her bridge club. One of them signed the letter with a heart emoji. A heart. On a legal warning. And yet, for someone so obsessed with rules, she didn't seem to grasp the basic principle of jurisdiction. You don't just march onto a veteran's lawn and declare war on a memorial without checking who actually holds the high ground. I didn't respond to her letter. I didn't call. I didn't move a single thing. What I did was wait, because Charlene had no idea the ground under her kitten heels was already crumbling, and I wasn't the only one who wanted to watch her fall. And that's when things got weird. I came home one evening to find the flag missing. The plaque and boots were still there, but the flag? Gone. I checked with neighbors. No one saw anything. My security cam? Disabled. Someone had literally snuck onto my property, cut the camera feed, and stolen a folded American flag off a memorial. That's when I knew we weren't just dealing with a bureaucratic narcissist anymore. We were dealing with someone bold enough to escalate. I filed a police report that night. The officer looked uncomfortable when I told him the details. He asked if I had any suspects. I didn't have proof, yet, but I had a gut feeling that reeked of Chanel No. 5 and entitlement. When I told him about Charlene and the HOA threats, he raised an eyebrow. She'd go that far? He asked. I shrugged. She thinks she's untouchable. Turns out, untouchable is a funny word. Because the next day, my brother's memorial wasn't just on my lawn anymore. It was trending online. One of my neighbors, who'd overheard Charlene ranting about taking matters into her own hands, uploaded a video. It caught her bragging to a friend during a morning power walk that she'd handled the flag situation herself. The comments were brutal. The story went viral. And I hadn't even made my move yet. But that move? Oh, it was coming. Because the day after that video dropped, Charlene received a letter. Not from me, not from the HOA board, but from someone she definitely wasn't expecting. A certain department that doesn't take kindly to civilians disrespecting war memorials. And the best part? It wasn't even the biggest surprise I had planned for her. Not by a long shot. Charlene didn't just double down. She went full thermonuclear petty. The day after that video of her leaked online, instead of going quiet like any sane person with an ounce of shame, she started printing out flyers. Real, physical, ink-smelling flyers. One was taped to every mailbox in the neighborhood, even mine. Reminder: HOA guidelines apply to all residents. Unauthorized displays, even those of a personal nature, are subject to fines and removal. No signature. No direct mention of me or the memorial. But everyone knew. It was her middle finger wrapped in passive-aggressive font. That same morning, she emailed the HOA board and tried to initiate an emergency vote to formally ban all non-landscaping-related fixtures in front yards. Her words. Fixtures. Like my brother's boots were just lawn gnomes with too much trauma behind them. Now, if this had been a year ago, maybe I would have lost it. Maybe I would have stood on my porch, shouted at the sky, demanded justice. But like I said, I don't yell anymore. I plan. And what Charlene didn't know, what she never even bothered to Google, was that I had been working on something in the background this whole time. Something bigger than her flyers, bigger than her HOA presidency, and a lot more permanent. It started with a call to my brother's old commanding officer. Then another to a few guys from his last unit. Then, a quiet but firm conversation with a very serious woman at the Department of Veterans Affairs. I didn't need to raise my voice. The facts spoke loud enough. A Gold Star memorial had been harassed, tampered with, vandalized. That put this beyond HOA politics. That made it federal. But I wasn't just stopping at paperwork and protocol. I was building a case. Not just against Charlene, but against the entire rotted root system she'd planted over the years. It turned out she'd been bullying people in the neighborhood for a long time. Janet, 3 doors down, had her kid's sidewalk chalk art power washed because it lowered property values. Ben, the guy with the classic car, got fined weekly until he sold it or moved it. A family on Elmwood had to remove their disabled son's ramp because it didn't match approved materials. These weren't just coincidences. These were patterns. And while Charlene polished her little HOA crown, I was quietly gathering affidavits, testimonials, and ring camera footage from residents who'd had enough. People were angry. But more importantly, they were ready to talk. While I built the legal side, Charlene kept spiraling. She tried to have my truck towed, claimed it was blocking visibility. The tow company showed up, took one look at my permit in the window, and drove off without touching it. Next day, a fresh violation note on my windshield. Handwritten, in all caps. She was unraveling. And the more she unraveled, the more people started to see her for what she really was. But still, there were a few who clung to her. Her little loyalists. The neighborhood busybodies who'd built their identities around enforcing trash bin placement times and measuring grass height like it was a competitive sport. At the next HOA meeting, I showed up early and quiet. I brought no fanfare, no legal entourage, just a folder and a flash drive. The room was packed. More than usual. People had heard things. Whispers about the flag, the video, the letter Charlene received. Some were just there for the drama, but most were there for the shift. For the change that had been brewing. Charlene started the meeting like usual, same monotone, same smug smirk. But when she reached the part about ongoing compliance issues, I raised my hand. She ignored me. I raised it again. A neighbor cleared his throat and said, "Let him speak." Then another, until she finally rolled her eyes and motioned for me to talk, like a teacher reluctantly calling on the one student who actually did the reading. I stepped forward, calm and clear. I explained what the memorial was, who it was for, and what had been done to it. Then I plugged in the flash drive. The screen lit up with her own voice from the leaked video, bragging about taking the flag. The room went silent. Her expression shifted from smug to tight-lipped panic. And then I opened the folder. Documents. State and federal protections. HOA bylaws she herself had violated. The police report. Witness statements. It wasn't a speech. It was an execution. And she knew it. Then came the twist. I announced, calmly, that legal counsel representing veterans organizations had taken an interest in the case. Not just mine, but others like it across the country. HOA abuse targeting military families wasn't a new thing. It was just usually quiet, hidden, unchallenged. But not this time. I didn't mention names. Didn't need to. Just said that inquiries had been sent to the County Housing Commission. That the State Attorney General's office had been CC'd. That a nonprofit specializing in veterans' legal protection was now involved. Charlene looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. But here's the thing about people like her. They don't retreat. They reload. 2 days after that meeting, a neighbor texted me a photo. Charlene had installed a new sign near the HOA clubhouse. A rule clarification, she called it. It read, "Effective immediately, all non-approved yard installations, regardless of context, are subject to fine." She didn't name me. But everyone knew. She wasn't backing down. She was digging in. I expected resistance. What I didn't expect was a call from a reporter. Small paper, local piece. Someone had tipped them off. Probably one of the neighbors. The story was short but biting. HOA president faces backlash over veteran memorial ban. It included a quote from a retired colonel who lived 2 blocks over. He called her actions the kind of bureaucratic cruelty that makes people lose faith in community leadership. The story spread faster than expected. Within a day, it hit regional news. Then a national military blog picked it up. And that's when things really changed. Because on the 3rd day after that story went live, Charlene came home to find several unfamiliar vehicles parked around the cul-de-sac. No police lights, no sirens. Just black SUVs and a few trucks with tinted windows. And in front of my house, standing in full dress uniform, were 6 members of Matt's old SEAL platoon. They weren't loud. They weren't there to intimidate. They stood silently, respectfully, facing the memorial. One of them knelt to place a new flag, the exact same size and style as the one Charlene stole. It fluttered quietly in the breeze. She watched from her window, frozen. But that wasn't the real surprise. The real surprise was still coming. Because what Charlene didn't know yet, what no one but a select few people knew, was that one of those men had connections. Not just military, political, legislative, the kind of connections that could turn a viral HOA scandal into a case study on abuse of power. And he wasn't just visiting for emotional support. He had come with paperwork of his own. And once she got served, this wouldn't just be a local HOA dispute. This was about to become a headline. The morning Charlene stepped outside and saw the seals standing in formation around my brother's memorial, she froze. No clipboard, no barking orders. Just wide eyes and a sudden realization that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally pushed the wrong person. The neighborhood came to a standstill. Kids riding bikes slowed to a stop. Cars crept by with windows rolled down. People stepped out of their homes not to gawk, but to witness. The men didn't say a word. They didn't need to. They wore their uniforms like armor and their grief like fire in their eyes. Each of them had served with Matt. Each of them had buried more brothers than most people could name. And they weren't just here for nostalgia. They were here to draw a line in the suburban sand. Charlene tried to act like it wasn't happening. She turned on her heel and retreated into her house, probably hoping that by lunchtime, the display of military solidarity would pack up and vanish like a passing storm. But she was wrong. The ceremony wasn't just a one-off. It was the opening act. That night, one of the seals, Callahan, quiet guy, built like a refrigerator with a buzz cut, met with a few neighbors in my garage. No cameras, no speeches. Just facts. He laid out the plan, what was coming, who was involved, and what our options were. It wasn't just about honoring Matt anymore. It was about making sure no HOA in the state could ever get away with something like this again. The next day, the local news van showed up. Not a flashy one, just a single reporter and a cameraman. They interviewed a few neighbors, some of the seals, and me. I told them the truth, that we had tried to handle it quietly, that we weren't looking for a fight, but that respect, once trampled, needed to be rebuilt publicly. Charlene, of course, refused to comment. She closed her curtains tighter than Fort Knox and sent out an email claiming she was being harassed by a coordinated intimidation campaign. She even called the police, again. Said she felt threatened by the presence of unknown individuals. When the officers arrived and recognized two of the seals from previous ceremonies in town, they shook their heads and left without taking a report. But the pressure was starting to show. Charlene's allies on the HOA board were no longer defending her. They were distancing themselves. One of them, Marla, dropped a manila envelope on my porch. Inside were copies of emails Charlene had sent out over the past few months. Petty, cruel emails. Mocking the family on Elmwood for their son's wheelchair ramp. Complaining that Janet's seasonal wreaths were a desperate cry for attention. And one email in particular, sent after the video of her went viral, sealed her fate. In it, she wrote that the neighborhood should be thankful I'm keeping our community clean of these grief displays. Her words, word for word. I forwarded them to the lawyer from the Veterans Legal Network. He replied in all caps, "Thank you." By the end of the week, the community was done pretending to be neutral. Yard after yard started putting up flags. Not big ones, not showy, just quiet, respectful nods. One neighbor staked a small sign in her lawn that said, "Thank you, Matt." Another made a cross out of wood and placed it under a tree with a note, for the soldier they tried to erase. It was subtle, but powerful. A wave of resistance built on dignity, not noise. And Charlene? She was starting to unravel. I saw her one morning, pacing on her front lawn, phone glued to her ear, barking at someone. Her hair, usually perfectly helmeted into place, was frazzled. She looked like a woman who realized her kingdom was crumbling but didn't know which wall to hold up first. And then came the moment that no one expected, not even me. A second news crew arrived, this time from a major network. They weren't just doing a local human interest piece. They were working on a broader segment about HOAs gone rogue, and our story was the new centerpiece. The crew set up a live interview, right in front of my brother's memorial. A reporter asked me what I wanted to come from all of this. I said, respect. Not just for Matt, but for every service member who shouldn't have to ask permission to be remembered. That clip got shared, then reshared, then picked up by veteran advocacy groups, politicians, and military pages all across social media. Charlene's name was everywhere, and not in the way she liked. Someone made a meme comparing her to a comic book villain who finds Spider-Man for swinging on non-approved buildings. It exploded online. She became a symbol, not of authority, but of absurdity. And then, almost like a plot twist in a bad sitcom, she tried to hold another HOA meeting. She actually thought she still had control. But when she walked in, she was greeted by an empty hall. Just 2 board members, both of whom immediately resigned. She stood at the front, blinking into the quiet, clutching her printed agenda like it was a life raft. But she wasn't done. That same day, she filed a cease and desist letter against me, claiming defamation. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. Defamation? From a woman who vandalized a memorial, got caught on camera, bragged about it, and was now being investigated for misappropriation of HOA funds? Yeah, good luck with that. The letter went straight to my attorney, who said, and I quote, "She just handed us the last nail in her own coffin." Because while all this was happening, while she was raging and spiraling and spinning stories, the real hammer was still in the air, mid-swing. Remember that SEAL with political connections? He had arranged a private meeting with the State Housing Authority. Not just to discuss Charlene, but to formally propose legislation that would protect veteran memorials from HOA interference statewide. And thanks to the media attention, that proposal was gaining serious traction. Charlene didn't know it yet, but she was about to become the face of a bill no HOA in the country wanted to be associated with. Then, on a random Tuesday morning, it happened. A knock at Charlene's door. Not a neighbor. Not a delivery. A formal process server. She had been officially served, summoned to court not just for harassment, but for a slew of violations that had come to light during the investigation. Misuse of HOA funds. Retaliation against residents. Failure to disclose conflicts of interest. And vandalism, which, when applied to a federally protected memorial, carried a much heavier weight than she'd ever imagined. She didn't answer the door. Just peeked through the blinds. But the whole neighborhood saw. And they knew. What no one saw coming, though, was what happened the next day. A real estate sign appeared in her front yard. Not one of those hopeful, for sale by owner types. This one had the cold, sharp font of a company brought in to move a property fast. No balloons. No open house. Just a silent surrender. A white flag on a stick. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because while Charlene may have been packing boxes, the damage was done. And the final act, the part that no one, not even she, could undo, was still on its way. Charlene might have slapped that real estate sign in her yard, but she hadn't surrendered. Not really. People like her don't go down gracefully. They go down swinging, even if all their swinging is paperwork and bitterness. The week after she was served, her last desperate attempts to spin the narrative began. First, she sent out a mass email to the HOA mailing list. One final manifesto where she painted herself as a victim of harassment, said she feared for her safety, claimed the veterans were staging some sort of intimidation campaign. She used words like mob, spectacle, and my personal favorite, targeted psychological warfare. That one almost made me spill my coffee. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so pathetically transparent. She wasn't scared of us. She was scared of losing. Losing control. Losing her legacy. losing the little kingdom of beige fences and manicured hedges she had ruled over for years like a discount dictator. But the thing about Charlene is, she never understood that fear doesn't work on people who've seen real danger. You don't scare a guy who's been under mortar fire with an email chain. And you definitely don't scare his brother's SEAL platoon with allegations typed in Comic Sans. As the legal process gained momentum, something shifted in the neighborhood. It was like a fog lifting. People who used to whisper now spoke openly. Stories came pouring out. One neighbor shared how Charlene once threatened to report her to child services because her son's toys were visible in the yard. Another confessed that Charlene fined them for hanging a wind chime that clashed with the community's auditory aesthetic. There were at least a dozen stories just like those, small, petty acts of control that people had quietly swallowed for years. But now, with her name on court documents and her behavior exposed, no one was afraid anymore. They were angry. And finally, they were ready to act. A special HOA election was called. The board, or what was left of it, couldn't function with 3 members having resigned and the 4th too ashamed to show up anymore. I hadn't planned to run. Really, I hadn't. But the neighborhood made it clear. They didn't just want Charlene gone. They wanted someone they could trust. Someone who didn't weaponize the bylaws like a toddler with a hammer. So I ran. Reluctantly. Quietly. And I won. Unanimously. Literally. No one ran against me. No one even abstained. Charlene didn't show up to vote. She didn't even leave her house that day. My first act as HOA president was simple. I passed a motion, backed by the new board, to permanently protect military memorials within the community. Any resident wishing to honor a fallen family member or veteran in their yard could do so without interference. The second motion was to audit the HOA's finances from the last 5 years. That one hit a nerve. The records were a mess. Missing invoices, inflated payments to landscaping companies that shared names with Charlene's extended family. It didn't take long to uncover a steady siphoning of funds masked as maintenance fees. Not huge amounts, but consistent. Enough to warrant a second legal notice, this time for financial misconduct. Charlene tried to blame the bookkeeper. Claimed she never saw the reports, that the board handled that side of things. But there were signatures, emails, handwritten notes in the margins of receipt. She had her fingerprints all over it. Her attorney, if she had one, must have begged her to settle. But Charlene didn't do reasonable. She doubled down one more time. Filed a countersuit for emotional distress. Said I had humiliated her, caused her mental anguish, and turned the neighborhood against her. My lawyer didn't even blink. Just added it to the growing pile of things that wouldn't stand up in court. But poetic justice doesn't always come from the courtroom. Sometimes it arrives in unexpected packages. The state legislature passed the new bill faster than anyone predicted. The public support, media attention, and testimony from veterans groups gave it rocket fuel. The Gold Star Protection Clause, they called it. It forbade any HOA in the state from interfering with memorial displays by families of fallen military members. Charlene's actions became the central case study. Her name, her quotes, her video, all part of the legislative record. She went from feared neighborhood tyrant to national cautionary tale. When the court date finally came, she didn't even try to fight. She walked in like a woman hoping the ground might swallow her whole before she reached the defendant's table. The judge didn't shout. He didn't need to. His tone was calm, steady, surgical. He reviewed the facts, read statements from neighbors and veterans, referenced the newly passed legislation, and then delivered the verdict. Charlene was found guilty of harassment, misconduct, and malicious vandalism. She was fined, personally, for emotional damages and ordered to issue a public apology, not just to me, but to the entire community. That apology never came. Instead, a typed statement appeared on the HOA's website, clearly written by a lawyer, robotic and devoid of sincerity. But that was fine. By then, no one cared what she had to say. She moved out 2 weeks later. Quietly. No goodbye party. No farewell email. Just a moving van in the driveway and her sulking through her front yard one last time, avoiding eye contact with every neighbor. A few folks watched from their porches. One guy clapped. I didn't. I just stood by the memorial, flag gently waving, and nodded when the van pulled away. It was over. But the story didn't end with her. Because sometimes, when a tyrant falls, something better grows in their place. A few weeks after she left, we hosted a community barbecue at the park. Not a forced event. Not some HOA mandated fun. Just neighbors being neighbors. Kids running around. Dogs chasing frisbees. People laughing without checking if the lawn chairs matched the HOA palette. At the end of the day, we held a small dedication. The park was renamed. Matt's name carved into the sign, a permanent reminder of the price of service, and the strength of a community that decided enough was enough. The memorial in my yard still stands. The flag's a little newer now. The boots have weathered a few more seasons. Sometimes I catch people pausing on their walk just to look. Some salute. Some bow their heads. No one complains. No one dares. Because they know. They remember. And they understand that this wasn't just about one memorial or one flag, or even one fallen soldier. It was about all of it. About principle. About respect. About standing your ground, not with anger, but with purpose. Charlene tried to erase a memory. She ended up becoming one herself, a cautionary tale etched in HOA history and state law. And me? I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. I got both.